Welcome back to My Trauma's Chronic, but I'm My Chronic, where we delve deep into the intersection of science, mental health, and advocacy. In today's episode, we embark on a journey with a remarkable individual who's not only a dedicated research scientist, but also a courageous advocate for mental health awareness. Imagine a world where the pursuit of knowledge is not hindered by the shadows of stigma and silent struggles. Our guest, Catherine, embodies resilience as she shares her personal story of navigating the complexities of mental health challenges in the demanding realms of academic and professional environments. Join us as we uncover the untold narrative behind the lab coat, revealing the human side of scientific discovery. From triumphs to tribulations, Catherine's journey offers invaluable insights into the transformative power of the right support in workplaces. So, grab your headphones, get cozy, and let's get started. Catherine, can you start by sharing a bit about your background and what led you to become a research scientist and an advocate for mental health awareness?
Right. So my name is Dr. Catherine Kibirige. I was born and raised in Kenya to Ugandan parents. My parents fled Uganda during the Idi Amin regime because some of our relatives were very politically active. So I guess my father became a target. And so they fled to neighboring Kenya, where me and my older sister were born. Yeah, I went to a local primary school, Nairobi Primary School, and then went on to join a British secondary school because by the time I got to about 13, 14, my parents had split up, but my father had moved over here to the UK with his new wife and family. And my sister and I were due to join them. So my mother put us in a British school so we could get into the British system before we moved over here. I became involved or interested in science because it was biology, chemistry were my strongest subjects, and I had a real interest in biology. And also having a Ugandan background, Uganda was the first country in Africa where HIV was officially acknowledged and identified and studied, and really affected me and personally because I lost quite a number of close family relatives, including cousins who I was close to. So I just became very interested in studying or being involved in HIV research. Uganda had just come out of a civil war at the time, so it was very devastating to us as a nation and just really hugely impacted us. So that's where my interest was born. When I moved over to the UK to join my dad and sister and the rest of my family, I did really well in A levels, particularly in chemistry, and then got a place at the University of Bath where I studied biochemistry. It became a straight through master's course. So I graduated with a master's, but then went home to rest before continuing the rest of my postgrad. I guess eventually did a PhD. Eventually got involved in HIV research, actually. I went to volunteer with the Ministry of Health, and they stationed me out in Rakai, which is the district where HIV was first, identified and studied. So I got to volunteer, and then they offered me a job. So I worked there for 2 years before getting sponsorship to do my PhD. So I then moved over to Johns Hopkins and did my PhD in the molecular microbiology and immunology department of the School of Public Health in a very prominent HIV lab, which was great. My interest in mental health advocacy stems from the fact that I had a major crisis. At least my first major crisis was in primary school. And it was something that my family really didn't acknowledge or didn't really deal with. I didn't see a doctor or anything. I was just told to act normal. And I guess my parents' response to that was just to move me on to secondary school. Like I said, my mom had planned to move us over to a British secondary school anyway, My sister had finished primary school and had moved over to the British secondary school, but I was just kind of pulled out of primary school before I completed and moved over to the British secondary school, which it was a private school, so I guess it was less harsh. I didn't experience as much bullying as I had experienced in my previous school and everything. So it was a nice environment. And I guess I did okay. But then when I got to the UK, I had, I guess, the second crisis at the end of, well, after my first year in the UK. I remember my first winter, I got the flu very badly. I'd never had the flu quite so bad. And just, I guess, the stress of a new environment, studying for A levels, etc. I had another crisis, but again, that was averted by sending me home to Uganda. My mom had moved back to Uganda by then, so I just went home for a long, vacation. The sunshine, the good weather, I guess the good food, being in her company, I felt better. But again, it was never really addressed as such. Ended up having another really major crisis at the end of university, which ended up in, I guess, my first hospitalization. Actually did see doctors at the time, had a care team, etc. But they didn't really want me to get, I guess, stuck in the system. So once they found out that my mother was in Uganda, they were like, oh, you've just been studying too hard. And they didn't even give me a diagnosis. They just said, you should just go home and rest. Gave me some medicine and said, if your sister or your dad are here, we can write a prescription. Just let them know. We'll send some more medicine if you need some more medicine. But again, it was something that as a family, there was just a lot of fear and taboo. So no one really wanted to talk about it as such. So no one even really checked if I was taking my medication. No one went back to the doctors to get me any more medication. But that was kind of why I ended up just staying in Uganda and then volunteered. And then when I was offered the job, decided to stay, just because I was recovering better being there. And I didn't necessarily want to come back and, I guess, deal with the depression here. My family situation here was a bit more unstable. So I just decided to stay home. But again, it wasn't something that I was medically addressed. So again, when I got to the US, my PhD, towards the end of my PhD, again, with all the stress, had another major crisis. But by then I had determined that it was something I just wanted to really investigate and find out on my own. I had been to see, a psychiatrist. I had started researching about the medications. So by the time I guess I ended up being hospitalized again, I was more receptive to treatment. And I guess that's when my journey really started into really trying to understand what my diagnosis was, getting second, third opinion, looking into holistic alternatives, and just really figuring out how best to manage my condition and helping others and, I guess, becoming an advocate.
If you don't mind going into your conditions, do you mind telling us what it is? Don't have to.
Right. So, I've I've had multiple different diagnoses and been misdiagnosed several times. I would rather not say the exact diagnosis, but it is a depressive disorder. I do have anxiety, and I do have past traumas. So I do have PTSD.
Yeah. And we'll get into that in further because that's one of the topics you wanted to discuss with us. Um, do you think, sorry, if you don't mind me asking,
Mhm.
what year did you come into the UK?
Ooh. It was about 1992, 1993, a long time ago. I'm giving away my age. It's a long time ago.
It must have been really difficult coming into a new country. where, you know, the society is different, you know, it's different from what you know and what you've been like around
Mhm.
from a very young age. And did you feel like that you had did you feel when you were going for support, when you did go see doctors,
Mhm.
that there was this sort of, I don't know how to phrase this, but sort of lack of understanding and support due to, you know, your ethnic backgrounds, you know, being from a BAME community?
Not not really. For me, it was more of an issue within my family that we just weren't
Mm.
dealing with it. So I didn't really have the, I guess, the language. I didn't know exactly what I was experiencing. Obviously it was tough. It was, I think my first year in the UK, up until that point was one of the toughest years of my life. Um, I went from, being around relatives, being around friends, living with my mother, to being in a foreign country. We were living just outside of London, and you could literally count the number of Black people on one hand. Hardly saw anybody, um, you know, going down the street or anything like that. We had moved into a really good neighborhood, but there was a lot of resistance to that. So, when my family moved in, this was before I arrived to join them. Various families moved out of the neighborhood. When my stepmother put my little sister and brother into the local, I guess, daycare center or play school, several parents stopped bringing their children. So it was a lot. It was a lot. My little brother was pushed off the slide um, soon after joining the care group, and for the whole of, I mean, I wasn't here. These were stories I heard, but for the whole of the first year of him being in the UK, he didn't speak at all at school. He would just speak a lot at home. But at school, the teachers were concerned that he wasn't learning English so it was a very different environment. I remember when I came, first of all, I just found the houses were very small, and then coming in and the door being locked behind us every time we came into the house made me feel very claustrophobic. Our neighbors hardly spoke to us. I remember, saying hi to people or whatever, and they'd completely ignore, or people would walk and go across the street. So just that kind of general hostility was very depressing to me. Although eventually, we did get to know our neighbors. The school was more mixed, I must say. I did make good friends at the school. I went to the local state school. I made good friends, although there were various comments that were made that were just inappropriate, I guess. But at that time, there really was no sensitivity over things like that. So it was a
Mm.
lot to adjust to. But actually, when we did go and see a doctor, when I did go see a GP just to get signed up and everything, a doctor did notice that I probably was depressed or anxious or stressed because I mentioned things like I was having difficulty sleeping. I would feel like somebody was sitting on my chest, or I'd have problems at night with breathing. And they wanted to know if I was anxious or anything. But I mean, I was really young at the time and didn't really recognize that as a symptom of stress.
Mm.
Um, so I think it was more an issue with my family not really taking it seriously and not really referring me to the help rather than this rather than I think with the doctors, if anything, they were maybe overly eager to diagnose, and maybe that's why when I did finally get into hospital, I, I had a pretty diverse team, because when I was finally hospitalized, it was in London, so it was more
Mm.
central London, and my care team was, there was an African doctor, an Indian doctor. They were very diverse, but they were very reluctant to actually diagnose me and label me because they didn't want me in the system. Just because, I mean, I'm sure things have improved, but at that time they were very quick to diagnose Black people or Asian people with mental illnesses, and you know, and you'd get stuck in the system. There was a lot of over medication and that type of thing. So if anything, there was a lot of fear and reluctance to acknowledge or diagnose me or put me into the system for those reasons. So with my family, it was very much like, oh, you're okay, don't, just pretend that you're normal or whatever. And I mean, a lot of my teachers did worry, but I guess my parents were not receptive to any discussions around that, because at least by the end of my first year, I was very depressed. I had teachers who noticed, and a teacher who actually called. But when they found out that I was going to go home for the winter, be with my mother, then everyone was like, okay, then that's fine. But yeah.
Yeah, I can relate it, only to an extent because, we're two very different people. And I would never understand truly what you've gone through. But, there's such a resistance in BAME communities about mental health, about addressing it. It's like hush hush, sweep it under the rug. Don't, not to address it. And it makes things really difficult at times,
Yeah.
intensifies that feeling.
It does. I mean, I remember there was one time we had a local corner store. Wasn't in the corner, but Asian owned. And I was really depressed. And I had gone in and I was contemplating calling Childline or something like that. And I don't know why I stopped. Maybe I stopped at the store to get some change or whatever. But I remember this Indian owner of the shop, either him or his mother or somebody, asking if I was all right. And then, and I hadn't told them, but for whatever reason, they guessed that, I might be wanting to call Childline or something like, oh, but they teased me about it. They were like, oh, look at her. Are you okay? Is she depressed? She looks like are you going to call Childline or something? Like taunted me. And it was so funny that I was at the stage where I was thinking, oh, maybe I should call Childline or something. But they teased me so much that I walked past the phone booth and went home and then never called Childline, when really it's something that could have probably really been helpful and useful to me at the time. Because like I said, I did end up having my first really major crisis. But yeah, that really is the attitude, unfortunately, within our community.
Yeah, it's it's really damaging, especially when you're, a vulnerable child. It's very, very damaging when you hear people saying things, uh, and you're like, oh, should I do it? Should I not? And then you think about what people might say, what people might think, how they will act, and it's just a whole like spiral in a way.
Mhm.
When did you first recognize and come to term with your mental health conditions?
Um, I think it had more. I think when I got to the US, I started reading up a lot about it. I think, magazine articles. I mean, I made really good friends in the UK and as a teen, and we did discuss things like depression, but never really discussed it in terms of I might be feeling depressed. But at least started reading about it and understanding the symptoms. And even if I was in a lot of denial, just realizing that actually, um, I am really down. And these are some of the symptoms of depression. And I've spoken to people who maybe had recognized it in me and had disclosed that they were on antidepressants and had kind of said it by way of encouraging me that, if you're really not that well, you should get on medication. But I was always resistant of getting on medication just because of the attitude within my family and just how much it had been discouraged, or just how much I knew they wouldn't support me, and then I might be teased or whatever. Although later I came to find out that there were other members of my family with the diagnosis and who were taking medication, but we just weren't, I guess, having very healthy conversations around it. But when I went to the US for my PhD, by then I had determined in my mind that I would go in and see a doctor and just speak to them about my symptoms and really just try and figure out, because I realized that it was just very constant, depression, something that wasn't lifting, something that I kept falling back into when things got very stressful. So I really did want to learn and figure out how to manage it. So I did, out of my own volition, go and see a doctor, describe my symptoms, and they were like, "Oh, it sounds like depression. Do you want any medication?" But I actually refused to take any medication until it got to the point that I had another crisis and was hospitalized and almost forced the medication. But then that's when I realized that, okay, I do need to take the medication. I can't avoid the medication. But so medication needs to be one of the tools or one of the avenues I use to get to the point where I'm feeling better or managing better. About that.
Yeah. Can like did your mental health ever affect, your academic or professional life?
Yeah. I mean, I really struggled in school. Like I told you, in primary school, I was moved from one school to the other just because I guess things had gotten to the point where it was rather uncomfortable for me to remain in the one school. Um, and and so that affected me. I mean, being pulled out of school before your, I guess, major final exams or that type of thing can have an effect on you. Um, um, yeah, I mean, I've had various major crises in school. I mean, I was always good academically, but then was good with exams generally, but my crises always tended to be around major exams. So that would really affect me in that sense. And then I'd always, even if I did get through the exams, I'd always be very debilitated after that. And took me a long time to find the tools to prevent the crises or just learn how to weather them better so that it wasn't affecting my ability to gain work. So like, for example, um, when I finished my A levels, I took a gap year, which was really great. Because it had been really grueling and I had, I'd had a crisis and hadn't really taken medication or really sought any treatment. So it's a good job I didn't go straight into university. Just taking a year out and doing fairly simple work helped me recover. But then at the end of undergrad, I had another crisis. And that didn't actually really manifest itself until I started work. So I went back and worked for one of the companies where I'd done an industrial placement. And within about a week or so, I was just very foggy, just had brain fog, wasn't functioning very well, wasn't doing well in my job. I actually started hearing voices and seeing things, so just started having these audiovisual hallucinations, but didn't even know enough to know that, okay, call a doctor. Like I really wasn't under any kind of medical care at the time. It was actually my landlady who called my family and called a doctor and actually disclosed to me how, she takes antidepressants, kind of strongly suggesting that I should get on antidepressants. But I mean, my work, unfortunately, the group I was in at the time just weren't very supportive as such. So they got me to sign off on work that I was getting sloppier and sloppier in the things I was doing in the lab. So they got me to sign off on my sloppy work and kind of dismissed me that way, which wasn't very nice of them. But obviously they just didn't want to deal with having a staff with the issue. That's how bad it was. But I now know enough to know when things are getting that bad and know to get on medication and know to get adjustments at work. But it has been a constant battle. I think with my current employer, I felt comfortable enough to disclose it. And luckily they have adjustments in place. So I do have flexible hours and that's been very helpful in terms of continuing to function despite whatever challenges I've had in my job. So it has been a difficult journey of trying to balance work, trying to balance academia, and deal with, a mental health condition.
How did you navigate the process of like disclosure to your employer?
Um, so in my previous institution, I ended up, I guess, having to tell my immediate boss. I mean, in academia, I think part of the reason I've stayed in academia is because there's much more openness to that, and because we have those kind of systems have to be in place for students, just because there's the students often need mental health support. So the HR department, I guess, tends to be more geared towards that. I think that's made it easier. And I guess it's happened enough times and it's been bad enough that it's just something that, even if I hadn't disclosed it, would have become pretty obvious. I think with my current position, so I've taken quite a few career breaks, at least academically, just to help with that. And with my most recent postdoctoral position, I had been working just as, I guess, as a lab technician before I got this position. And I wasn't too sure if I was ready or well enough to tackle something that was as challenging or demanding, given my mental health condition. But it was actually my boss who noticed that I wasn't really. I was experiencing a lot of brain fog. So he noticed that maybe I wasn't necessarily understanding or following instructions very well. And luckily, because they have very set rules and systems in place, he referred me to occupational health. And so I did let the occupational health advisor know about my history. And based on that, let my employer know that actually this is a recognized condition and put the concessions in place for me. And that actually ended up being very helpful because they did have a very standard helpful policy procedure and referred me on for extra support that was very helpful. So I think that has been very encouraging for me, like to have an employer that has all those systems in place. And we do have an ABLE network at university as part of the college. There's a support group for people with neurodiverse people. So I have participated in that. I have been asked to speak. We get to sit on various committees and I guess advocate and inform policy. So that's been, I guess, very redemptive for me as somebody who's really struggled in the past and has been treated unfairly in my employment because of my condition. So I am very careful, I guess, with my employment. The employer I have right now, like I say, has very good policy and very good HR. So despite various challenges I've had in different groups, I have remained with this particular employer. And I guess just found another position within the same institution because at least I know I have support through the HR department. So I think it has affected my decisions about whether to move on to other institutions or get another job. And I think if I am to look for another job, it's something that I'll definitely consider.
What have been some significant challenges you've encountered in the academic setting due to, mental health difficulties, and how did you overcome them?
So I experienced a lot of mental fog or brain fog when I'm stressed. And one of the things that was recommended to me through occupational health was to try mindfulness meditation. So I've done a lot of mindfulness meditation. I'm also just working with, I guess, my doctor with my medication, because a lot of medications have side effects, and just really having the patience and working with the doctor to find the right medication, find the right combination of medication, balance out the side effects while allowing you to keep functioning. So I struggle in that with some of the medicines. they kind of numb you out, or they'll relax you, but relax you to the point where you're not functioning. So for me, it's always a balance between, you know, having a medication that's allowing me to really, really chill out, but then I guess not really meet deadlines or not really care so much about things, versus being on a very low dose and not being on medication and being more functional and being able to actually perform tasks, but being super anxious to the point that maybe I'm hypervigilant or I'm too tense. So finding more holistic methods of relaxing and remaining calm, so that I'm not needing to take medication that's making me too woozy. So a lot of it has just been wanting to minimize my medication, because with the side effects, I think I found with a lot of medications, I gain a lot of weight. They give me a lot of water retention. I end up having a lot of issues with my joints and my knees. So they can be counterproductive in that they're causing, maybe helping me mentally, but causing a lot of physical health, negative health effects, versus developing other tools or mechanisms to manage my anxiety and my stress, and maybe adjusting my work as well, so that even if I am having those issues, I'm still able to perform my job satisfactorily and have a good work-life balance. So I think one of the ways I've managed that is just to slow down on, I guess, my career trajectory. So I've taken quite a number of career breaks. Currently, I'm doing a secondment as a research manager, which I'm finding much easier to cope with than when I was more actively involved in research. But it's also allowing me, because I'm supporting other researchers in their grant writing and grant proposals, it's actually really allowing me to really learn and master the whole grant writing and process, which is a key skill that I'll need for the next stage. So just kind of taking my time, I guess, with my career. And, I've done 3 postdocs. I should be at the point now, I guess, where I'm becoming more independent, but I'm taking my time in that, so that I'm really taking the time to learn the skills and figure out my health and get to a point where I'm more able to cope with that when I get to that stage. So not necessarily giving up on my dreams, but maybe slowing down and delaying certain things and allowing myself the time to improve my health and tackle my health issues, so that I'm better able to cope with more challenging work. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. You're doing well. Um, you know, can you elaborate on any instances, if you feel comfortable, where you felt discriminated against or treated unfairly in your professional endeavors because of your own mental health?
Well, I have problems with my sleep-wake cycle, and that's been a challenge for me academically, because and when I'm very bad, I guess, with my mental health, I also become very slow. So it'll take me longer to do things. So I've always so one of my main challenges when I'm doing research is the fact that I'll get slower and slower. It'll take me longer and longer, and then my sleep-wake cycle will get off, and so it's just having flexible hours, but then also having to meet various expectations like deadlines, or be at meetings or at certain times, especially if I've ended up working in the lab late, and getting kind of accommodations or understanding around that has been very difficult or very complicated. And there have been times when my boss has been okay, the HR department has been okay, but other members of the lab have complained and, maybe said, or, accused me maybe of not working hard enough, or raised issues about whether I'm really capable, given the times when I'm not functioning very well and maybe come across as not being as clever or not being as capable. So there's been friction in the past around that. I mean, there have been times when, even if, say, my employer has tried to, or my line manager has tried to tackle the issue by maybe disclosing that the fact that I do have a disability and I have this accommodation, there have been times when there's been a lot of antagonism around that. And there have been times when I don't think my line manager necessarily did it out of contempt, but then disclosed my disability to support me. But then the disclosure ended up causing me a lot of discomfort at work, because then a lot of people were discussing it. I've had issues where people will say that I'm just making it up and I'm not really that ill and I'm just trying to get out of doing my work. Even if I do get the work done, it can cause a lot of issues, I guess, if an employer isn't used to dealing with it or a group isn't used to dealing with it. But I think part of what we do within the ABLE network, apart from advocating, we also help each other. You know, we meet every so often and we can talk about these things. So we help each other, give each other strategies and tips for navigating these things. And within the institution now, we have mental health first aiders, and we have various advocates and mediators. So I guess the redemptive thing in all of that is being part of a network where I can help other people, listen to other people, and we can develop strategies and we can help them navigate through those types of situations. I wish I could give you like a golden answer, but I mean, it's not really a golden, it's not, I mean, a lot of it comes with awareness, a lot of it comes with experience. I'm now, I guess through experience, have learned that, I mean, I will disclose it. I won't go into detail necessarily unless my employer asks. I focus more on doing a really good job first. And then if I ever get to the point where I do need to take a rest day or something comes up and I need to ask for the flexibility, or I need to bring up the fact that I do have an accommodation and I'm having to use the accommodation, then I try and do that off the back of having done good work. But just learning how to, I guess, pace myself and make sure I'm doing a job that's well within my capabilities, so that when I do have relapses or times when I'm not functioning at my best, the job's not so tough that things won't fall apart when I'm not at my best. So I guess I've just had to accept the fact that I have to work within the parameters of my disability, and I make sure that I'm not overstretching myself and I'm giving myself enough of a buffer with the jobs that I do, and I guess with the timelines. And that's why I've kind of set myself a slower pace as far as my career goes, that I will eventually, I guess, move on to the next phase of my career, but I'm giving myself enough recovery time and building up myself in terms of my skills, in terms of my CV, so that when I get to that stage, I can tackle it well. And also, I guess one good thing with academia as well is with fellowships and things like that, you can take them part-time. So there is an option of moving on to the next phase of my career, but doing it on a part-time basis, so that I can have the rest days and the flexibility that I need.
Amazing. How did you find support and understanding amongst peers and mentors in academia and the professionals peer regarding, your mental health challenges?
Um, I think, like I said, within academia, as long as you're willing to ask for the help or go to occupational health or go to the mental health service, then you will find a lot of support. I think the first step or the hardest thing is acknowledging that you have a problem and taking that help. Because I find on most campuses, they tend to advertise, the mental health facilities and provisions and support that there is quite well. So I think one of the biggest barriers is just getting to the point where you are willing to accept that help, because they will put you in touch with various support groups, and even through the NHS, there are various support groups. So, and sometimes it's just that you're so busy or you're so run down that even just, like with my mindfulness meditation, sometimes I'm so run down that even just getting onto my computer and being on the call, because they want you to have your video on and all of that type of thing. Sometimes I'm so run down that I don't even necessarily feel like doing that, or I don't even necessarily feel like engaging with people. So, not everyone is receptive to it. Not everyone is positive about it, but I think my advice would be to reach out to those groups and facilities and be part of a support group, because then you will get help and tips navigating these types of things, and you'll have people you can speak to about that. With my employers, my current employer, because the group I'm in is kind of an extension of HR, I guess they're well trained and kind of uphold policy. So are very much, I guess, keyed in and doing things correctly. With my previous group, even if our overall boss was okay with it, she was very busy and was hardly there. And we didn't really have a culture of that, not so much within the group, although that's something that the HR department tackled, and I guess the group became better. But it was, I get quite a challenging and maybe painful experience going through that within the group. Having to tackle or navigate my mental health within with around peers or work members who weren't very supportive or responsive. But I did manage to do a good job, and I managed to get it done. And I think in retrospect, people did realize that actually, it's obviously something wrong with her, because actually the quality of her work or what she produced in the end was good. And it made it easier for people coming after me, because then they were like, oh, okay, so this is another person who needs the accommodation, but actually at the end of the day, they can do the work. So it can be tough being a pioneer in those types of situations. But if you maintain a positive attitude and maybe use your experience to kind of advocate for others or pave the way, make things better for others, then that can help, I guess, redeem the situation. But I think, there's a big difference between the US and the UK. I think in the US, people talk a lot more about mental health. And the US, I think, was good for me in that respect, because I remember one of my bosses was going through a crisis, and just was very open about the fact that, oh, I'm going through this, and that she had lost her husband. She had been to various things, so she was seeing she very openly, she would discuss it at the lunch table with everybody, that she was seeing a therapist, her doctors put her on this medication and that medication. And, when I mentioned the medication I was on, she was like, oh, I tried that, it made me feel like this. So it was much easier to talk about those types of things there. I found in the UK, people tend to be much more closed and tend to have more of a negative attitude. So I'm a bit more careful. I think the group that I mentioned, part of the mistake I made was acting like I was in America and speaking about things very openly in an environment where they don't speak of things as openly. And it made me realize that, okay, disclosing this information might not be the best thing, but in certain people, in certain situations, so I'm better off being a bit more selective. And I'm not going to get as much sympathy here, I guess, as I did generally in the US. So adjusting to the culture here has, I mean, it's helped. I think with my new job, I don't mention it, but then also there's been no real need to mention it because I'm doing a job that's well within my capabilities. So it's not necessarily something that's come up as an issue as such. And I guess people deal with it kind of differently here. So you tell your line manager, but you don't tell anybody else as really, if there's no need to. So just kind of learning how to navigate those cultural differences as well, and how best to present myself in a work environment has been a learning curve.
What role does self-advocacy play, when you have chronic mental health difficulties, particularly, when faced with institutional societal barriers?
Self-advocacy is important because, I mean, it's like with any, I guess, career type situation, you need to speak for yourself, you need to advocate for yourself regardless. So I think with mental health, and there's a fine balance, you do need to find the right way of doing it. You don't necessarily want to be presenting yourself as a victim as such, but you do want to present yourself as somebody who's capable, but maybe needs slight adjustments that won't necessarily inconvenience everybody. We won't necessarily inconvenience people, but will allow you to perform better and will be, an enhancement to the group. So you need to kind of present yourself in that way. But I found that if you do produce good work and you do act as professionally as possible, and present yourself as professionally as possible, then when you do slip up, people are more willing to kind of listen and ask. And line managers are obligated to kind of ask and make accommodations for people when they're experiencing various difficulties. And I think, in workplaces, people do experience various difficulties. People will have other illnesses, they'll have losses in the family or things like that, where they don't perform quite as well. And employers are used to making those adjustments. So I think with mental health, you kind of have to come at it in that kind of way as well. That, the same way they'd make an adjustment for somebody who needs a wheelchair, or somebody who is dyslexic, or somebody who has autism, is the same way they need to make adjustments for you. But then you also need to be self-aware. You need to have really, but this is a journey. This is still something I'm learning as well. But really understanding and learning and being accepting of the fact that, and not understanding what adjustments you need, and knowing what it is that actually helps you function better. And then when you're given those accommodations, using them to your advantage, rather than taking advantage of your employer. So, currently I have flexible hours. I work from home twice a day. And it's great because if I get
Twice a day or twice a week? Sorry.
Sorry?
You said twice a day, or do you mean twice a week?
Oh, sorry, twice a week. 2 days a week I work from home. So it's just meant that if I'm ever getting out of balance, I can really adjust myself on those work from home days. But then I also have to be careful that I am getting my work done and I'm not, I guess, misusing my employer's time. But it's really helped me because I have the flexibility to kind of rest or adjust my hours as needed. Because sometimes I'll just need to take a nap every so often, or get away from my computer every so often. but then that allows me to then come back with a fresh mind. And it's much easier to do that when you're working from home than when you're in your work environment. But actually, in my work environment, when I did recently have to tell my employer, she actually took me over to a new building that has a cafe on the roof. And she was just like, it's actually really nice up here, that you could just come up here every so often for a break. And it turned out when I mentioned it to her, she actually had quite a similar problem, a health condition that was giving her brain fog and very similar symptoms. So she was actually really quite receptive and gave lots of useful tips and advice and let me know how to get to the park. We have a park right next to our workplace, and said, you could take an hour lunch and just go and walk in the park or sit in the park. So she actually was very understanding and gave me lots of tips and suggestions and let me know what she did when she was going through a different health condition with similar symptoms. So you'd be quite surprised how many people face, maybe they don't have your condition, but they face similar situations. Because we all go through traumatic situations as well. Like even if you don't necessarily have a PTSD diagnosis, I'm sure all of us can relate to something that really traumatized them and affected their ability to function. So sometimes, maybe discussing your symptoms might be a better way of discussing the adjustments you need rather than a diagnosis, because people don't necessarily understand what the diagnosis entails as such. But if you say, oh, I get brain fog, like it's quite difficult in meetings sometimes. I need to record things, I need to write things, I need to take a break, then people will understand, especially if you're coming back and actually producing good work after having been given the adjustment.
Can you describe any positive experiences or moments of growth that you've encountered in your journey, despite the challenges posed by your mental health?
I think just the fact that I've kept in academia, a lot of people drop out. I think all the very awkward and very intense situations or crises I've been in have actually been moments of growth, because they've forced me to, I guess, tackle the situation head on. Forced me. I mean, I've been forced to disclose several times, but despite how awkward and intense and difficult those times were, it's always worked out okay, in retrospect. I'm like, actually, as difficult as it was to have that conversation or speak to people, or as difficult as it was that, the HR department came in, then everybody had to have a training or whatever. When you look back on it, you were like, but actually, I could have lost my job. I managed to get the study done. I managed to get the paper written. I got given an extension. So people will try and accommodate you as long as you're being reasonable. But it also taught me the value of seeking help, seeking it early, and then just kind of taking responsibility, realizing that, okay, people are willing to help me. People are willing to make accommodations. So now I really do need to figure out how best to utilize that help and just take responsibility for my health. Now that now that I know the diagnosis, now that I have all these tools, they've offered me the mindfulness training. I can get a personal mindfulness coach. I can come in a bit later if I need to. Like, people are willing to make these adjustments. So it takes away the excuses in a lot of ways. And it's just like, okay, so there's really no excuse anymore for me. I really need to do what I need to do on my end. If it's, keeping on working with my doctor, taking my medication, going to the gym, eating responsibly, because the only person hindering my progress now, is me. So I think that's the positive thing that's come out of it all, is that, this can be done. You can do it. you can have a productive life, you can have a productive career despite a diagnosis. And it's just that you need to take that you need to take the reins, I guess, control over your health, and just figure out what works for you, and I guess do the work that's necessary to maintain your health.
How do you envision addressing and dismantling the stigma surrounding mental health in academic and professional environments based on your own personal experiences and insights?
It was very difficult for me to, first of all, accept it myself. Like I say, my family were in a lot of denial. I was in a lot of denial. So the biggest step for me was just accepting that, okay, this is something that I have, and realizing that it's not going to go away per se. It needs to be managed. And then I'm always going to come up with situations, say in my workplace in academia, where it comes up and I need adjustments. It may affect my work. So it's something that I need to, I guess, advocate for. Well, I need to ask for the help when I need it. And I need to advocate for myself. But then when I did come out, and I guess I was kind of forced into the situation. Like I said, it was a situation where my employer, in defense of the decisions that she made and in defense of the accommodations that had been given, told people without asking me first. And then that came out. And then I was like, well, I might as well just come out and say it. So I did I was interviewed for, well, I was actually really pleasantly surprised and touched by all the accommodations that were put in place for me by my institution, by the HR, and actually how they then came and tackled the situation within my work group. We had, I think, 2 or 3 mental health first aiders trained within the group. So I was actually really nicely surprised by how it was tackled and how I was able to maintain my job. I was willing to maybe cut down my hours and everything, but they didn't do that. So I kind of volunteered and then was interviewed for the National Disability Month, and then it actually became quite a big piece where they were signposting people to all the different accommodation and help and support that there is within the institution, including highlighting the mental health first aiders and everything. And it actually ended up being a much bigger issue than I thought it would be. I ended up being called to speak at other avenues. And then since then, I've had students who've struggled, but I've been able to signpost them, and I've been able to, I guess, push back on people against peers and other people who are giving them a difficult time, but also learned the right system or the right procedure, the right way of managing students or people who are working under me who are experiencing these types of situations. So it's been good to remain within the group and then remain within the institution and be involved in advocacy and I guess informing policy and being part of implementing policy and tackling policy, and also what's the word I'm looking for? But actually then having people working under me and being able to follow the policy and see what a positive effect it's had on them, being able to complete their work and excel and do well despite having gone through a crisis. So it's something, I guess, that's come back full circle. And in some ways, it's shown me why it's such a good thing. And not just within my institution, I think even within my family, my wider circle of my friends, I've had other people who I've encouraged to let the employers know. I've let them know what their rights are, what the laws are, what kind of accommodations they can get, and a lot of people don't even realize that, you can ask for this, you can ask for that. You can justify the need for, say, a work from home day or another work from home day based around your disability. And if in the end you end up doing better, producing better work, then eventually your boss will be okay with that. And I've had friends, family members who've really been struggling at work, but have then been able to negotiate accommodations and flexibility that's allowed them to navigate through and get through a crisis. So it's encouraged me to just keep talking, keep sharing, and keep being involved within the network. And I think once, especially now that I do speak quite often, I find people do come and share a lot. And so I do a lot of signposting. And it's been very rewarding in that sense.
What advice would you offer to individuals struggling with mental health challenges in academia or the professional world based on your own journey and lessons that you've learned from it?
I would say not to be afraid. I think fear is our biggest enemy. I think with the stigma and the way we were raised, a lot of us, I was teased a lot that I was going mad. And every time I would look like I was having a crisis, I was struggling, and I'm sure they didn't mean it in a bad way, but, my family members would be like, oh, well, I won't say who specifically, but one of my parents would be like, oh, are you going mad? Are you going mad? Do you want to go mad? Are you saying you're mad? So I just had this I had a lot of fear around madness. But once I did engage with the doctor, and I guess it was the right doctor, like I've heard some stories of people who've had really unpleasant experiences within the mental health system, that I understand why maybe some doctors were very reluctant to diagnose me and were reluctant to put me into the system. But having, I guess, come to terms with it myself, being on medication, been through really severe crises, but then also come out of those and then learned how to manage them and learned how to avoid them, I realized that the best thing is not to be afraid. Engage with your doctor, take your medication, work with your doctor. Don't be afraid to get a second opinion or a third opinion. Don't be afraid to try more than one doctor. Don't be afraid to try different medications and holistic tools to find what really works for you. I think with me, at least one of the first doctors I met was very harsh. And I had been through a traumatic experience, and they literally said to me that, I don't believe that. You're just this and that. And forced a hospitalization on me and forced me to take a particular medication. And it was to the point where I ended up going along with it because I was afraid. I needed to finish my academics. I was afraid that they wouldn't discharge me if I didn't comply. So that's one of the worst situations I've been in. I went along with that, but I was quite lucky in that I have a cousin who's a doctor who I then spoke to, who was more willing to listen to me and said, actually, that sounds that it might not be quite the right diagnosis because you did have this trauma. So a lot of your symptoms are probably due to the trauma. And then eventually I moved and was living next to a friend of mine who is certified as a medicinal herbalist and clinical nutritionist, who had worked with a lot of people with very severe mental health issues, much worse than me, and helped them wean off and adjust their medications. So I was very lucky in that we became close friends, and I was able to work with her to really figure out my diagnosis and figure out less debilitating medications. And she kind of got me into things like meditation and other holistic, more kind of lifestyle changes to improve my sleep and things like that. So I would also advise people to seek holistic treatment and alternative therapies, because those have been really helpful to me. Some doctors are more receptive to that than others, but I would say if it's a path that you want to go on, then you really want to find a doctor that's willing to work with you as you try alternative medication and alternative care. And then also to encourage people to see a therapist. I think within our communities, we're very anti-therapy. But just talking to somebody who's not going to judge you, who understands, who can give objective, constructive advice and feedback as often as you need to, and who's going to maintain your confidentiality is really useful and helpful. It can be quite expensive, but there are avenues of doing that either through groups or even online that make it more affordable. But I would really encourage people to find therapists and to try different therapists. You know, sometimes the cultural context is important, somebody who really understands your culture and what you're dealing with. Sometimes you'd think it would be important, but people who don't necessarily would seem understand your culture can sometimes be much more objective and can help you get to the truth of the matter more than somebody who maybe is sympathetic to your culture, if that's how you want to think about it. So I would encourage people to seek therapy. I can't stress the importance of talk therapy now.
One of the things that you said when we, previously spoke is that you found monitoring to be impactful.
On what?
Peer monitoring.
Peer mentoring.
Mentoring, sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know where peer mentoring to be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Can you provide examples of how that has directly impacted your journey with mental health and facilitated, a journey of resilience and recovery?
So peer mentoring is just basically sharing with other people who are going through similar things. And it's been very helpful for me because, like I said, I don't come from a family where we were necessarily, at least initially, discussing these things very freely. So I didn't even have the language. And even if I'd heard the word, I didn't have the vocabulary. And even if I'd heard the word depression, I didn't fully really understand what it meant. Because people would come to me and say, oh, it sounds like you might be depressed. Do you want to take medication? But I was like, what do you mean depressed? And I didn't really understand that, oh, the medication, there is medication that will help me stop feeling the symptoms that I'm feeling. But speaking to peer mentors, I think gave me the vocabulary because it's people who I ended up being comfortable with. I can describe my symptoms and they can be like, yeah, that's this, kind of decoding a lot of the terminology and saying, yeah, just, I mean, like I was encouraged to do say mindfulness through having had it mentioned by a friend of mine. And I was like, well, what's that? They're like, no, it really helps. It helps in this way. It'll help you with that. So just having people who you can speak to freely, who can contextualize and give advice or let you know their stories and what's worked for them is really helpful in terms of helping you figure out making you more open to try certain things and helping you figure out what would work for you. So even things like herbs, Chinese medicine, acupuncture, I would have never tried acupuncture unless a close friend or relative of mine said, no, you really need to try it. It worked for me like this, So it's it's just, I mean, we get lots of tips and advice from our friends. So I think if you can find other people who are very similar in terms of age or who are going the same career or who are also in academia but are facing the same challenges as you, and just speaking with them and getting advice from them, some mentorship from them is very helpful.
How does peer mentoring differ from other forms of support systems such as therapy or counselling in its approach to address mental health challenges?
Peer mentoring is more what's the word? Just getting support from other people who've got a similar challenge. So they may not necessarily be professionally trained. Certainly they may not be charging you for it. And they may not always offer the best advice as such, but because they have a similar challenge and navigating similar things, and maybe have tried things that you haven't tried, or just know of things that you don't know, they can really be good at signposting, or just because they understand what you're going through to a certain extent, they may just be a good sounding board, because you may not you may not always be able to get an appointment with a therapist, or you may not always have the money for a therapist. But if you have somebody who's willing to, I have one of my really good friends, and it's something that's just evolved. It's not even necessarily something that we agreed that we're going to have this peer mentoring relationship. But when I'm super overwhelmed, I'm able to call her, and she'll be like, "Do you really need to talk?" And even if she might be overwhelmed, we'll just get on the phone with each other, and then she's able to just listen to me and help me, I guess, voice it out. Sometimes you just need to kind of voice out the whole situation. Then she's like, "Okay, take a deep breath." And she'll take me through things that I could have done on my own, but just being able to bounce it off her and just say, "Okay, look, let's prioritize this. Does this need to be done? What should we do here?" Because sometimes you're overwhelmed, or your brain's so foggy that it's just really difficult to think through what you need to do, or you find yourself either spiraling down, or find yourself kind of going around in circles. And it's something that a therapist can help you through, but also it's something a peer mentor, somebody who you can easily just get on the phone and just say, "Look, I'm really highly anxious at the moment," or "I'm finding it hard to sleep," or "I'm finding it hard to focus." They can just kind of either help you snap out of it, or even just signpost you and say, "Look, I think you really just need to call in sick, book an appointment with your doctor." Just kind of help you navigate things when you're very overwhelmed.
What do you think is a sign of a good, effective peer mentoring program?
Peer mentoring, wow. I've not been part of any formal peer mentoring as far as mental health goes. I don't really know of one as such. But we have, I guess the closest thing we have in my institution is the mental health first aiders. And they are people who are kind of trained make to listen, and then to signpost, to kind of assess, okay, is this really bad? And assess what needs to be done, assess whether if they need to bring in a mediator, or if they just need to be a sounding board for a particular situation. And so it's something that came out of Australia, and it's something you can, I guess, look up online, the Mental Health First Aider Network, and they will come and train you or train an institution and help you get set up within your institution if you need to. But mental health first aiders then become recognized within a group. They'll have it as a footer or signature in their emails, and they'll wear specially colored like lanyards or whatever, or a ribbon or something to identify them as a first aider. And it's just something that's then advertised, so that if ever anyone needs to speak to a mental health first aider, they know who to go to. And they're kind of trained to find a quiet place, keep things in confidence. And they're basically just trained to be there as first ports of call, and signpost people where it's needed, and just kind of help them work through a situation. So, and it's been highly successful. It's something that's kind of really grown since its first inception. So, but I would say, if you did find somebody who you thought would be a good peer mentor, or I do come to people now. I do have people now who say want me to speak to their daughter, or speak to this person, or speak to that person. I would say listening in a non-judgmental manner, not being fearful, because a lot of people are fearful of mental health. But I think, that's why peers are so important, because if it's people who've been through a crisis and been on medication and managed to get through it, then they're less afraid of dealing with you when you're going through it as such. So that's why it's so important to just find somebody who's not afraid, somebody who has the time and is willing to extend their friendship and is just willing to go that little bit of an extra mile, I guess, to just hold your hand when you're going through a crisis would be a good peer mentor.
What advice would you offer to someone who's hesitant to seek professional help for their mental health struggles?
Um, I would tell them that any help or some help is better than no help at all. You don't want to get to the point that the sooner you can deal with a mental health crisis, the better. And medication doesn't have to be forever. You can do 3 months, 6 months. I think most doctors will want you to stabilize on a medication for at least 3 months and see how you do before you try another one. So just getting on some medication, getting professional attention early is better than nothing. And then you can always make adjustments as you go along, as you stabilize, and as you figure out more and want to advocate for yourself more. If it turns out that you don't necessarily like the doctor, or you want to try somebody else, or you want to try another therapist, you can always change. But I would say that, if you are in a crisis or you think you might need the help, just get the initial help, and get yourself stabilized as soon as possible. And then you can always make adjustments or look for something more suitable, or something that you prefer further down the line.
How can workplaces and academic institutions create environments that are conducive to mental health and well-being for all employees and students?
I think destigmatizing or removing the taboo, and sometimes it can just be simple things as just mentioning it, normalizing it. I remember, for example, when I started my PhD program, it was around the time of 9/11. A lot of lecturers were saying, oh, just they and I think they were instructed to just make a point of, at the beginning of each lecture, just saying it's been a really distressful and stressful time, and some of you may be experiencing various symptoms, and just to let you know that it's okay to seek medical attention. And if they didn't mind, giving little stories about how they'd seen a doctor or they'd seen a therapist. So normalizing it, normalizing it. And like, I get asked to speak quite a bit around my institution, just because people know that I've disclosed my status, and I'm willing to share. So they find that, especially for students or undergrads, hearing seeing a more senior person openly, disclose and just discuss their mental health, and the fact that they seek this help when they need it, kind of helps them feel more comfortable about that and normalizes it. Because if they're in a class or in a situation where people might have teased them or whatever, if the lecturer or the teacher is open about it, then it's not such a big deal anymore. So just creating an environment where it's not such a big deal, where it's openly discussed. Starting the mental health first aid program if they can. Advertising the occupational health services, and having policy in place and training for line managers, so that they know that, if somebody is experiencing these symptoms, if they're showing these signs, or if they come to you with this particular problem, this is the right way of dealing with it. Have them go to see occupational health. Imperial has very clear policies, like, if you are sent to occupational health and occupational health do concede that it is a mental health issue, they'll work with you and your line manager to come up with accommodations. You can review them every so often. And as long as you're trying, they will accommodate you. So it's just things like they can relieve you of certain duties that you're finding difficult at the time, give you other tasks that you're finding much more able to cope with at the time, readjust your deadlines, your workload, give you flexible hours, give you work from home days, things like that help accommodate people. And the more people who you have who've been accommodated successfully, the more normal it becomes and acceptable it becomes within a work environment. So, not ridiculing or shaming people when they're going through crises. And I mean, we have mediation, we have like anti-harassment and anti-bullying kind of policies, and we train people to be, I guess, active bystanders as well. So if they witness somebody being treated unfairly or wrongly, or being bullied or harassed or shamed for certain things, then we are encouraged to either be an active bystander or report it further up the chain if needed. And that has actually made a big difference as those types of policies have been implemented. So I've actually, like I said, it's been very encouraging for me to go through a situation where it really was a rather toxic environment, but see how it was tackled and how things were turned around, has highlighted the importance of advocacy and having these systems in place and following through. Because many times we're afraid, even if the policy is there, you don't necessarily want to rock the boat. But being in an environment where actually the employer does uphold their policies has been very encouraging.
That makes a massive difference as an employee, feeling like your employer has your back and is able to advocate, for what is right. Um, what is, what made you want to discuss this topic with us today and share it with our listeners?
I think I was referred to you by maybe somebody who'd heard me speak at my institution in another forum. So like I said, I've kept being invited to speak, and I get such positive feedback afterwards that I realize that, it's actually really important work, and it's an impactful for people who are going through similar things as I did years and years ago. I really wish I'd been able to listen to somebody like me speak. My younger self had access to something like this. So it's something, I guess, that I'm just kind of paying back or paying forward, because I do appreciate the people who took the time to share their stories to me at a time when I was still trying to figure it out. And also I am part of a group called Thriving Together, or Thrive 2G. So if we do organize various events. We have my friend who I've mentioned, who's a medical herbalist and clinical nutritionist, is going to come and speak on our forum about holistic health and mental wellness. So this gives me a chance, I guess, to advertise our group and signpost people to our resources and the help we offer as well, if they're interested. So I can forward you the flyer, I guess, if you don't mind forwarding it within your forum. So
Yeah, definitely. And we will link it down below as well.
okay.
Are there any, like you mentioned one of them, but are there any upcoming projects, events, or resources you'd like to share with our audience? And where can our listeners find you or connect with you to stay up to date with your work?
So like I said, my name is Dr. Catherine Kibirige. I'm based at Imperial College London, so I do have a profile and an online presence. I'm currently part of a mental health, I guess, mentoring advocacy group called Thriving Together, or Thrive 2G. We're just establishing our social media presence, but we have done various webinars, and we do have some others coming up that people are more than welcome to attend. And I guess I will provide all the links below. And then I'm available to talk at other venues and in other forums if people would like me to. That's what I do within Thrive2G. I tend to provide the more, I guess, the professional, career, academic type talks, encouraging people with mental health disability, and I guess giving them advice on how to navigate that, like I've done tonight. So I'm more than willing to do that in other forums. Not tonight, but today or whenever this gets aired. But yeah, that's what encouraged me to do this.
Is there any final thing that you'd like to add?
Well, just to hope that people have found this encouraging. Hope they found it useful. I will be, I guess, posting all my talks of this type within the Thrive2G networks and forums, and we hope to signpost people to other people who can help. And they're more than welcome to reach out to me or to reach out to us for any further advice or help they might need.
Amazing. Finally, what is one thing that you're grateful for today?
One thing that I'm grateful today is to be alive, to be happy, to be well. Gosh, lots of things that I'm grateful for. To have my current job that allows me flexibility, to be working from home, to be able to speak to you. Just grateful to be alive and well.
Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. As we come to the end of this insightful journey, we hope you've been inspired by Catherine's story of resilience and advocacy. Remember, mental health is not an individual journey, but a collective responsibility. By fostering understanding, compassion, and support, we can break down barriers and create inclusive spaces where everybody feels valued. If you resonate with Catherine's story or have your own experience to share, we encourage you to join the conversation. Together, let's continue to raise awareness, challenge stigmas, and prioritize mental well-being in all aspects of life. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more empowering content. And if you're seeking support or resources, don't hesitate to reach out to trusted individual organizations in your community. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, you're never alone in this journey. Stay iconic until next time.